Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to do an author spotlight on John Steinbeck. So this is the first of this new series that I'm starting where I discuss one of my favorite authors and then I give you guys a little guide as to where to get started with that author, and I explain why I like some of their famous novels, etc. So first, I just want to give you guys a little disclaimer to say that this series is meant to be more of a conversation starter. I don't see myself as an expert or anything like that. And I'm still on my own journey discovering these authors. So I still have a lot of books of theirs that I haven't read yet, but I think that it'll be a nice way to pique your interest in discovering these authors. So John Steinbeck, just to give you a little background info, he was born in 1902 in Salinas, California, and a lot of his novels actually take place in Central California, and he has a special style in describing the landscape and the people that is very characteristic. So when discussing where to start with Steinbeck, a lot of people are saying, oh, just start with something super short like Of Mice and Men, things like that. But in my opinion, I think that you're better off getting started with something a little bit more characteristic of his style in general, and perhaps a collection of short stories is a good place to start. For me, I didn't really start in any particular order. I started with some of his shorter fiction, and then I recently read his early short stories. And now in retrospect, I think that would have been a nice place to start. I can recommend these two short story collections. So one is called The Pastures of Heaven and the other one is The Long Valley. They're both excellent. They both have beautiful descriptions of nature and interesting stories. I think I would recommend starting with The Pastures of Heaven, which is the one that he wrote first, because he wrote this one in 1932. At the time when he wrote it, he wasn't famous yet. Later on in 1962, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. So this one, The Pastures of Heaven, was written as one of his early works. It has 12 stories that all take place in this little valley called the Pastures of Heaven. So it's interesting to see how the stories have very slight connections or mentions of other characters, but they're pretty much independent stories. My favorite stories in this one are 10 and 11. So just to give you a little flavor, one of those stories is about a man who is coming to this valley that is pretty much empty. And so he just has a sheet that he's covering himself with to sleep in at night. And he's just falling asleep, daydreaming of what the future holds for him if he moves to this valley and builds a home there. And so his imagination is so vivid that he's actually falling asleep, hearing children running around, seeing a big house built right on the edge of the valley. And he's got this entire future life of his in his mind already as a vision. And later on, he does build his home there, and he's building a very large home with several floors. And some of the neighbors, the people around him, are not quite understanding what he's trying to do, because they're like, well, you're just a single guy. What are you, what are you doing building this gigantic home? But he has this vision in his mind, and that's what's guiding his every step. And later on, he does get married and starts a family. But I just really liked how the entire arch of his life and how this vision he had in the very beginning kept him going the whole time, how that's depicted in the story. And so that was one of those stories that I really liked. And then the other story I really liked was the story of a young man in his 30s who is basically acting as a caregiver to his parents. So they all live in the same house. There's a big living room with 2 recliners, and you have the dad in one recliner and the mom in the other recliner. And so this man is basically a caregiver to his parents. So he's working very hard on the land outside, and then he comes back in and check on the parents, and they suffer from arthritis, so they're always complaining and they're always criticizing him. And so something interesting happens when they pass away. It's like he has kept his desire for socializing and hanging out with other people. He has kept this completely repressed while they were alive, because they never wanted to go out and they never wanted to hang out with the other people in the area or anything like that, because they were just homebodies. And so all of a sudden, his desire for social interaction comes out in full force, and his personality almost changes overnight, where he's wanting to go out, wanting to organize events and do all sorts of things. And then something paradoxical happens where he's constantly surrounded by people, but at the same time, he feels very alone, because he has these flashbacks where he will hear his mother's voice in his head criticizing him and things like that. And these things are very personal to him. It's like his own struggle, and he's not really sharing that with anybody. And I really liked all of it. I liked how the recliners almost take on an eerie quality, where he's like trying to block that out, that energy out, by closing the door and not going in there anymore. And then so there's sort of a metaphor of the way he compartmentalizes his thoughts in his brain, and then the way he's keeping that room separate and closing the door and not going in there anymore. So I thought that was beautiful, the way his soul and the house kind of have a parallel energy to them. So I really like that story. So I would say definitely start with Pastures of Heaven if you have not discovered Steinbeck yet. And if you just want to read 1 or 2 stories, try 10 and 11. Those are my favorites. 1 and 12 are kind of like the introduction and sort of the conclusion, where 1 is showing before anybody even moved there, what was this land, who discovered it, and then 12 is when it's sort of like decades later, when tourists come to the area to just look around and imagine what life is like living in that valley. But overall, I would say this collection has beautiful descriptions, complex characters, great character analysis, and I think it's a good starting point to kind of see what Steinbeck has to offer. So that's the Pastures of Heaven. Now, another one that's also a short story collection is The Long Valley. He wrote this one a little bit later in his career. Now, this one, I would say, is a little bit more complex. The very first story in this one is called The Chrysanthemums. And I remember when I read it, I was kind of confused as to what happened, you know, and I think it's because in this collection, he kind of experiments with more subtleties, where you have to kind of read between the lines what's really happening with the characters. So I would recommend definitely starting with the Pastures of Heaven and reading this one a little bit later on your journey. because this one I feel like is a little bit more challenging. The language is still very, very approachable. I still highly recommend this one, but I would say this one, just know that it's a little bit more complex. And so you have to kind of guess what the characters are thinking and understand that everything is in the subtleties. What I do like about this one is the descriptions of nature are even more, if it's possible, it's even more detailed and vivid. I think that in this collection, he really achieves his best nature writing. So I really like this one as well, The Long Valley. And just so you know, this one also includes the Red Pony within it. So I had bought this separately, but it's actually included in this one. Okay, so these are the short story collections, which I think are a great place to start. Now, another approach would be to start with this one, Travels with Charley in Search of America. But this one is if your mind prefers to start at the end and then do a retrospective and start back to the beginning. Like if you like those movies where they show you the final outcome and then they flash back to the beginning of the story, then you might like to start with this one. So this was written in the 1960s. So Steinbeck decided to go on a long road trip, and he wrote this book, which is a little bit more approachable than his regular prose, right? So the regular prose, you feel like it's a narrator, there's long descriptions of nature, descriptions of character analysis, things like that. In this one, it's more written in a conversational tone, very informal writing. So if that's an obstacle for you, then this might be a good starting point. The language is very plain. Also, I would say in this one, it's a completely different perspective because it's really a behind the scenes look at Steinbeck, the actual individual. So at one point he's visiting his son who's in college, and another point he's spending some time with his wife. So you're really getting a behind the scenes look at his actual life. And this is a beautiful book because you also get to know a little bit more about his opinions, his feelings about things. He had an insatiable curiosity about the human condition and why people do what they do. And so you really get to see this in this book. So I would recommend this either after you've read a bunch of his books and you want to get a peek at who he was as a person, or just to kick off your Steinbeck journey. If you're one of those people where you'd like to know the end before the beginning, then you can start with this one. Okay, this is Travels with Charley. Charley was his dog, his poodle. So once you've had your little introduction to Steinbeck and you've decided that you want more, you're interested in his writing style and you like his character analysis, then I would say you can get into some of his shorter fiction. So he has a lot of short books, about 150 to 200 pages long. So on this long list of short books, you have To a God Unknown, which is really beautifully written. You have Tortilla Flat, which is sort of a reimagining of King Arthur's Knights. And but that one I haven't read yet, so I can't quite say if I recommend it or not. It sounds like it's very male-oriented. It's a bunch of men who are going on some adventures. And you have Cannery Row and Sweet Thursday are a pair. So Cannery Row is the first one, and then Sweet Thursday is the sequel to that. And then you have some other ones, of course, like Of Mice and Men, that a lot of people have heard about. But Of Mice and Men, some of the language is a little bit like more challenging. So I don't recommend that for somebody who's like an English learner as a starting point. And then there's The Winter of Our Discontent, In Dubious Battle. So all of these are his shorter fiction. Now, once you've read a couple of the shorter fiction and you already started with the short stories, now you're ready to tackle some of his longer books, okay? East of Eden, which is pretty long, and The Grapes of Wrath, okay? So East of Eden, I think, is about close to 600, not quite 600 pages, and then this one is 455 pages. So if you're gonna pick one or the other, depending on your priority, I would say if you want to go in terms of a chronological order, then it's a little bit of a toss-up, because this one is chronologically something that takes place at the turn of the century, whereas this one takes place in the 30s. So technically this one comes first. However, this one he actually wrote later, if that makes sense. But I would say if it's about the complexity of the language, then I would start with East of Eden, because this one is written more in plain English, whereas this one has a lot of regional dialect. So if the complexity of the language is an issue, then I would start with East of Eden. Now, everybody has their favorite, right? East of Eden feels like a saga, right? Because you have multiple generations, and then you have these families that end up having a common thread. It has sort of this saga type of feel to it, because it has some parallels with the biblical story of Cain and Abel, the two brothers. You have a family with two brothers in one generation, and then again the two brothers the following generation. So it has this sort of interesting feel to it, that you feel like when something happens, it feels like fate has struck, and you feel like it was inevitable. And there's these very memorable characters in this one. There's a Chinese man by the name of Li who has so much wisdom. It's really, really beautiful. So this one is actually my personal favorite of his. Of all the books that I've read, this one is my favorite. And then you have The Grapes of Wrath. Now, interestingly, some people say this is their favorite. So this one has a completely different flavor to it, because this one, you're only following one family. And so you're completely with them the whole time from beginning to end. This one, the language is challenging because you have this regional dialect going on the whole time. And the other thing that makes this one challenging is there's just so much sadness in this one. I would say every chapter you have to brace yourself for more sadness and more tragedy, because it takes place during the Great Depression, and people were literally starving. So the feeling you get when you read The Grapes of Wrath is this feeling that you have to survive. You have to go find another job, picking fruit or whatever you can find. So the family starts out in Oklahoma, and then they move to California. So you follow their journey, and it's about poverty, resilience. It's about interesting concepts like individualism versus community. So this one will also really make you think. They both make you think. This one will make you think in terms of, what is the nature of evil? Are people born evil, or do they become evil? This is the kind of question you'll ask yourself with this one. And then this one, the questions you'll ask yourself are things like, what is the role of government in taking care of people when something happens on a large scale, like a recession or a famine? And this one asks the question, is it more important to preserve the family unit at all costs, or is it more important to go off on your own and try to make it on your own? So definitely very important questions. And this one will also make you think about, well, I guess both of them tackle the concept of trauma, which is something that's always of interest to me, is that if you're traumatized, how does that affect your behavior? How does that affect the trajectory of your life? So these books are really good if that's of interest to you. Okay, so please let me know in the comments if you guys have read some Steinbeck novels, which one is your favorite, and which one do you recommend for me to read in the future. I was thinking my next Steinbeck might be either Sweet Thursday, because I've already read Cannery Row, or The Winter of Our Discontent. So let me know what you guys think, okay? Till next time, happy reading!